never escape the unblinking eye of a doll. They're always watching you.
When I was 9, my family was clawing their way out of poverty. My dad would go by garage sales, or his co-workers would give him toys that their own children no longer wanted. So while we were poor, Dad desperately did his best to spoil us in the little ways he could. My dad kind of believes in the paranormal, but refuses to acknowledge it when it's time to. Man up and face the problem, he says. Around this time, I was on the cusp of ghost adventures. I loved the mystery and suspense of the show, and while it made me paranoid, it wasn't bad and I barely showed outward fear. This detail is important because at the time, my parents had formed this narrative that watching ghost stuff was making me not function right as a person, which made them delegitimize any real tangible paranoia I had. At some point in my 9-year-old life, my father's co-worker's grandmother gives the co-worker 3 expensive ceramic dolls out of the hundreds that this grandmother had. They all had glass eyes whose eyelids would move should you lay the doll in a certain position. You could move them with your finger, but the lids rolled back too far to pull, and pulling risked damaging the long eyelashes these dolls had. The first 2 dolls I loved. One was a mermaid and one was a nurse. Because they were ceramic, Dad put them in a box in my closet, so they couldn't get damaged. The third doll, however, Dad placed front and center where I could see it at the top shelf, and it could see me. This doll was bedazzled in a hand-woven Native American getup, with a headdress made from real feathers. The doll's eyes were glass, but with pure crystal pupils. I thought it was gorgeous, but from the get-go, something felt all wrong with this doll. The 2 months this doll sat in my closet watching me, I began hearing a strange tapping on my pillow. Some items on my desk would fall off, and as I'd close my eyes at night, I swear I could see those difficult eyelids close on their own. One night, I thought I could hear crying in the closet. Nothing was there, but I had decided enough was enough. I went to my dad the next day. "Dad, these dolls are so pretty, but the feather one doesn't feel right."
What do you mean, kiddo?
"The feathered one doesn't feel right."
Okay. I'll find a home for that one. Are you sure you don't want that one?
"Just that one." His eyes got a little wide and he left for work. I went to school. Later that night, I was trying to sleep and I heard Dad come into the doorway to check on me. But I looked dead asleep, so he didn't come in. I heard him stand there a while, and he was there for probably 5 minutes. Eventually, I heard him gasp and run. When I woke up, the doll was gone. I never saw it again, and Dad to this day pretends it never existed. I don't know what he saw that night, but it must have been enough to send that doll into the void. So I'm going to share my story. Honestly, even just talking about it makes me feel uncomfortable as I feel I'm summoning it. Background info. I've had sleep paralysis since I was a child. Look up what this entails. Usually it's a shadowy figure with a very heavy presence. It sucks. I was 10, just moved to the US, so all we could afford was this very small house, directly across from a cemetery. This probably had nothing to do with it, but it certainly didn't help calm my 10-year-old self. My grandma always gifted me these porcelain dolls, you know the ones. They need a stand to hold them straight, and they are creepy looking, with glassy eyes. I had a shelf in my room, which was in the basement, where I kept this doll collection. They always creeped me out, but since they were gifts, I kept them. One time my grandma brought me this extremely creepy doll. All the other dolls had some colouring in their faces, blushed cheeks, etc. This one didn't. She wore a deep red velvety dress, had extremely pale skin, and glossy, dead-looking blue eyes with straight blonde hair and bangs that were a little too short. She freaked me out. Soon after, I started having extreme sleep paralysis. Prior to this, my experiences were tame and just involved seeing a shadowy figure. Now, I started hearing loud manic laughter, mocking me, telling me that my family couldn't hear me and I couldn't yell for help. Coming from a religious country, I immediately started praying loudly in my mind and yelling in my head that I believed in God. Now, I'm not really that religious. I don't go to church, but I did go to Catholic school for a few years. In this situation, this is all I could think of to scream. This kept reoccurring multiple times a week, to the point I learned to sleep with my television on, and sometimes all the lights on as well, because that would allow me to know the passage of time during the paralysis, and whether I was awake or not. The more I write, the more I'm realizing how absolutely insane this all sounds. I swear this is 100% true. I would tell my mum, and thankfully, she would empathize with me and let me sleep in her bed, even though I was between 10 to 12 this time. The climax was one day, during the daylight after school, I went downstairs, and the feeling of dread that usually came right before I had sleep paralysis came over me. Except this time, I was fully awake and it was daylight. I went downstairs and heard laughter and laughter. It's important I mention that every time I had sleep paralysis, it was this doll that I would see reveal itself to me during the ordeal. I went to my room to find a sticker of an angel ripped in half. It was previously pasted to my bed frame. I ran upstairs, and from there, I couldn't go to the basement alone. I had to either ask my brother to come with, or someone else. We moved my bed upstairs, and I shared a room with my mum. Thankfully, after a few years we moved to a better house a few blocks away. My aunt was helping us move. She has really good intuition. She dreams about people's pregnancies and whatnot. So we never really mentioned what I went through with her. It was something we kept in-house. She stayed behind doing general cleaning, and everyone was at the new house unpacking. When my mum came back to pick up more stuff, my aunt asked her if she had felt or seen anything in the house. My mum asked why, and my aunt casually said, "Oh, I asked because when I was cleaning alone, I saw a small child going around the house." My mum was taken aback, as obviously she knew what I had been claiming, and I even told her I felt it was a young person. That doll did not come with us to the next house. I do still have occasional sleep paralysis, but since I've had them so much, I know all the warning signs and can usually get myself out of it. The laughter never came again though. Background info. There is a small room upstairs in our house where my mum has a small collection of the dolls with porcelain heads and hands and legs which are almost immovable. They are manufactured to remain in a standing position. This is important. They have been standing on a shelf with their heads straightened for more than 20 years without any moves or falling. They are positioned in such a way that when you are standing directly across from them, they are looking directly to your face. All the incidents meanwhile. The first weird thing happened last year on the 11th of August when I went there looking for an old German dictionary. I was searching in the library at the opposite part of the room, and suddenly a doll almost fell on my head. It confused me, because there should not be a doll standing on the library. All of them were always on the shelf. I turned around and saw an empty place in a row of the standing dolls on the shelf. But who would do that? My mum has trouble with walking and wasn't upstairs for a couple of years, and my dad goes only to the room with a solar inverter. I put the doll on a table under the window and went away. I returned there on the 19th of August with the idea to put the doll back on the shelf. But immediately after I arrived, I saw that 5 dolls were sitting on the shelf with their heads turned to the window. But the one from the 11th of August remained in an unchanged position. The 4 of them were the closest ones to the door. The 5th one was a doll dressed as a countess in red. I quickly found out that putting them back to the standing position was very difficult. You have to do this very slowly and must be very careful. I did it, but still didn't understand how it would be possible that they had been able to change the position of their bodies and heads on their own, and even looked like someone arranged them. I decided to keep an eye on them. I went to check them out once more that day, and found that my effort to make them standing was useless. That time 6 of them were sitting on the shelf. 5 were the same. The new one dressed as a countess in blue. The new doll's head was turned to the door. The 5 other faced the window again. I didn't try to put them back to the right position because I was already afraid of them. I ran away from the room. It took courage to go back there at the end of August. The 6 were sitting in the same position, but the doll which I had placed on the table under the window wasn't there. She was standing on the shelf with family albums, which was under the shelf with other dolls. I put the doll back on the table and went away. For a couple of months, the dolls didn't move. But when I went there at 9:30 p.m., only the 4 nearest to the door were sitting. 2 countesses are standing again, but how can a doll change position from sitting to standing on her own? I didn't even check the one which should be on the table under the window. No other signs of anything paranormal in the house right now. The dolls are completely covered in dust. If someone living was moving with them, they wouldn't be. My question is, what to do with them? Update. Yesterday I scattered salt at the doorway and put a crucifix on the left side of the table in order to face directly at the dolls. Today I read a comment suggesting to take a picture at least. I took a photo of the doll which has been moving around the room from the shelf with albums and put her on the table to take a picture of her. I came back an hour later and saw the scene didn't look like I left it, and I'm 100% sure nobody was upstairs since I left because I was in the living room the whole time, and from the place where I sat, I would see if somebody went upstairs. The first thing which I noticed immediately was the crucifix stood next to the doll on the right side and was facing me, not the dolls. I checked the picture I took with the position of the doll and saw the doll moved as well. Update 2. If anyone is listening to this, the situation is normal. I removed the doll which was moving around the room, and the other dolls remained still since. You want to know her, who she is and where she came from, how she came to be my presence, and the way she has affected my life. Well, if you're looking for a haunting like you see in the movies that fills you with fear deep into your soul, you're reading the wrong story. Because it's never scary when the one who is haunted becomes friends with the spirit, right? Victoria came to me as a gift, along with her friends when I was a small child. From the moment I received her, I could feel she was no ordinary doll, and I could also feel that she was the one in charge. I was 5 or 6 when she first showed herself in a way I'll always remember. I had stopped playing with her because I got a new Barbie that I was infatuated with. I came home and went straight to my room to play with my new Barbie. But she had her head turned the wrong way, her arm at an odd angle. I remember glancing at the shelf where Victoria was kept. She seemed to be looking right at me. Odd occurrences have continued to happen over the years. Small, unexplained things that most would brush off. Like coming home and knowing I had shut my closet doors, but there they were, open. Finding broken toys that I firmly blamed my brother on, that he denied. Realizing that even to this day, Victoria's dress stays completely clean, no dust, even though she is never cleaned, never played with anymore. As I got older, I started to realize the odd things that were happening were from her, or her presence. But, oddly enough, I was never scared. Even thinking about the times she had shown herself, I feel calm. She never meant to cause harm. She has simply wanted to show that she is there. She wants the respect she deserves, and also that a piece of her cares. I truly believe that. Once when I was in high school, I could hear the floorboards creaking upstairs. I could hear distinct footsteps walking in my old bedroom, where Victoria still resided. I had moved to the bigger bedroom across the hall. I knew no one should be home though, so I cautiously started to walk up the stairs. And then I felt it, the presence of Victoria that I hadn't felt in years. And I no longer felt scared of an intruder or a burglar. I felt calm and curious, wondering what Victoria was up to. Walking into my old bedroom is where I found her, sitting in the middle of the room, as clean as the day I got her, despite her being stashed away in the closet on a shelf, forgotten about until now. I simply scooped her up and apologized for not getting her out more, but that I was older and couldn't play with dolls anymore. After that, she almost seemed to just be sad and lonely. There are moments that both my mum and I have been sitting on the bed and we can feel her presence come sit down next to us. She will open doors that are incredibly hard to open, and she will also unlock our dog's cage and let her out during the day. After I had my son, I continued to stay in the house for a few months to have help from my parents with the newborn baby. At first, I had his bassinet next to my bed, and one night, I had just gotten him to sleep, and I was laying there in the dark, trying to fall asleep too, when I heard and felt footsteps come right next to me and my son. I asked my mum what she was doing, having absolutely no doubt in my brain that it was her. I got no reply, so I turned on the light, and there was no one there. But that's when I felt her. I felt her curiosity about the baby, but I did not feel scared. I knew she was simply curious. Once my son got older, I moved his crib into my old bedroom, where Victoria and the other dolls stay inside the closet. One night, I was laying down. I had just gotten my son to sleep, and I was listening to his soft snores on the baby monitor. Suddenly, I started to hear whispers. The whispers became louder, almost as if the voice was getting closer to the monitor, to my baby. It wasn't a language I could understand. All of a sudden, I could hear my son giggle. That's when I got out of bed and went into his room. He was smiling at the closet, the door open that I always kept shut. Victoria staring down at him. When I look back at him, I notice his mobile above his crib is turning, and I had never turned it on. My son and I moved out to our own house, leaving the dolls behind at my parents'. My parents, who before never believed in ghosts or hauntings or my stories of Victoria, were now experiencing situations that they couldn't understand, situations that scared them. They would hear footsteps walking around upstairs, feel a presence sitting next to them. Doors would open and close, even if they had been locked. It got to the point that my mum asked me to take the dolls. Once I did, all of the things they experienced stopped. Since having Victoria back in my presence, my son and I have both had experiences with her. Once while we were napping, my son woke up and pointed to the corner and asked, "Mummy, who is she?" He continued to point at someone I couldn't see. The next incident was where my son started asking to go play in the basement. I asked him why would he want to go and do that? We never play down there. And he replied, "The lady in the basement is nice to me." And often, once again, I hear whispers over the baby monitor. I awoke one night terrified that someone was inside my house because I heard my son talking back to a voice. I ran into his room, but there was no one there, that I could see at least. My decision to remove Victoria from the rest of the dolls does not fully come from fear. Part is from our history. It is evident she does not enjoy being alone or ignored, and the other part is with my son being able to see her form and communicate with her. It appears to me her presence is growing. I will say the only time I fully experienced fear was the nightmare I had one night. It didn't feel like a nightmare though, not like one I have ever experienced. In this nightmare I was walking into my room, my son asleep in my bed. Once I entered my room, I noticed Victoria sitting next to my bed. She had been in the basement. She looked at me and her eyes became dark circles. She opened her mouth and hissed at me. I quickly grabbed her and tried to smash her porcelain face against the wall. But she turned her head all the way around and hissed at me again. I quickly woke up, my heart pounding, and I swear I saw a figure exit my room. The next day my son came home from school with a drawing of a little girl. Her eyes scribbled over with completely dark holes. This artwork I will send along with Victoria as well. I hope she behaves. She does not like to be challenged, to not be in charge, and she does not like to be left alone. Victoria the doll now resides at the Museum of Shadows in Nebraska with other haunted or spiritual items. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories, and the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.